Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this update on the Hazard Communication Standard. On July of this year, or on May 20th of this year, an update to the Hazard Communication Standard was published in the Federal Register with an effective date of next week on July 19th. In the next half hour, we'll talk about the changes that were made to the standard and how they may affect you or your business. If you have questions during the course of the webinar, please just type them into chat. We'll try to respond to them live during the meeting. If there are any unanswered questions at the end of the meeting, we'll respond to them after the webinar, and everyone will get a transcript of the chat questions and answers. Everyone who's registered for this course will get the chat transcript emailed to them, or a link to the chat transcript will be emailed to them. We also will publish this webinar and the slide deck, the PowerPoint presentation, within the next day or two on our website, which appears at the bottom of this page, iup.edu/PA-OSHA consultation. Okay, very good. So what are we going to talk about? The recent updates to the Hazard Communication Standard, which are fairly minimal. We will cover them in a half hour or less, and they mainly affect chemical manufacturers or importers in the United States or distributors in the United States. And they're going to affect really two major topics. For very small containers, there's updates to ease the labeling requirements on very small containers, and for manufacturers that claim the percentages of their ingredients are trade secrets, it tightens up a little bit how that can be interpreted by providing specific ranges. And we'll go through those. So who's affected? The scope of the standard doesn't change in any way. Everyone who was covered by the Hazard Communication Standard, which is any employer that has hazardous chemicals in the workplace, remains the same. It just the changes are not related to scope. Why is OSHA making the change? The biggest reason is alignment with the United Nations globally harmonized system of classification and labeling. So the United Nations publishes the globally harmonized standard to ensure that international shipments carry chemical hazard information, from one country to another, so that workers are warned of hazards of any materials they're receiving. And the United Nations reviews and revises as necessary that standard every 2 years. So it's under constant minor revision. And from time to time, OSHA recognizes that they need to make some changes to the Hazard Communication Standard to make it consistent to the globally harmonized system, so that chemical manufacturers in the U.S. or importers and manufacturers in the U.S. don't have two sets of rules to comply by, basically, so that everything works the same way. And this new rule becomes effective on July 19th, but we'll go through at the end. There's a prolonged implementation schedule. So even though the new rule is effective, complying with the new rule is pushed out into the next couple of years. So why is the Hazard Communication Standard being revised, as it has been in the past and will be in the future? Mainly because the United Nations globally harmonized system is evolving. And if we update the Hazard Communication Standard, it makes compliance for global corporations more consistent. Okay. Also, OSHA takes the opportunity to incorporate any progression of new ideas to improve the standard. And OSHA takes the opportunity to codify letters of interpretation. As you may know, when you find that the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard, as it applies to you, isn't quite clear, you're not sure exactly how to interpret the standard, you can write a letter to OSHA, and in good time they'll respond to you. And that letter of interpretation they send to you is published, so that other entities that have the same question can find the interpretation and apply it. And the fact that these interpretations are required alerts OSHA to the fact that they need to go in and change language here and there to make the standard clearer. So what changes? The changes are so few. I'm just going to go through the actual changes in the standard itself, just so we don't miss anything. Okay, so the last standard was to bring us up to date with revision 3 of the globally harmonized system. This one is to bring us up primarily, OSHA says, with revision 7. They say primarily because at this point revisions 8, 9, and 10 have come out. But the changes were so minimal that the primary change is to align us with revision 7. So they've redefined hazards, or they've incorporated a new sort of hazard. We'll talk later about intrinsic hazards. So OSHA said in addition to physical and health hazards, there may be other hazards presented by chemicals in the workplace. In the definitions section, they've added 8 new definitions. They've reworded, made some changes to 3 definitions, and they've taken 1 definition out. So we'll go through these. They now define bulk shipment. They've added a definition for combustible dusts. Okay. As I mentioned, they've now recognized that there are, in addition to physical and health hazards, there are other intrinsic hazards. So they've just broadened that term to hazardous and taken out the physical or health. They've defined what a gas, as you'll see later on, they defined a liquid and they defined a solid, because some substances at standard temperatures, standard pressures are on the borderline between states. So OSHA has described how it classifies how it classifies the physical state of a substance. In the hazardous chemical, they used to treat pyrophoric gases, which are self-igniting gases. They used to treat pyrophoric gases sort of as their own category. Now they've recategorized them under the flammable gases category. So there's some changes here just to reflect that the pyrophoric gases are now part of a larger classification of flammable gases. They talk about immediate outer packaging, which becomes important when we talk about labeling these very small containers. As I said, they've defined liquid in addition to gas. They are now calling out that aerosols, in addition to gases, liquids, or solids, some materials are intended to be used as aerosols, or aerosols are generated in their use. So they call out our aerosols under the physical hazards. They've also added a whole section on desensitized explosives and determining, they've amended Appendix B pretty substantially to discuss desensitized desensitized explosives. Plus, that's where you find this new classification of pyrophoric gases. Okay. In the past, they referred to physicians or nurses, and now they've broadened that definition to physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, and they just use this acronym PLHCP throughout. Okay, they've taken the pyrophoric gas definition out altogether. As I mentioned, they've recategorized it. Although in Appendix B, the physical hazards appendix, this definition remains in the appendix. They put in a definition of released for shipment, and as we've already seen, gas, liquid, they've defined solids. Okay, so that's it for the new definitions. Under hazard classification, they've added any hazards associated with the chemical's intrinsic properties. They talk about a change in the chemical's form, recognizing that, for example, something going from a liquid to a gas can also lead to a huge pressure change, huge increase in pressure and volume. And other things like, sometimes when we switch, when a chemical goes from, say, liquid to gas, there's a huge cooling effect. So there's a cold hazard, or it's exothermic and there's a huge heating effect when the chemical changes states. So they're just recognizing that, and also recognizing that there may be a chemical reaction that could reasonably be anticipated in the use of their chemical. And so they have a responsibility to make sure that's revealed in the safety data sheet. Okay, here just in most places that they don't refer to chapter 29. In this case, they did, so they've taken it out. So this case, they just talk about they just incorporate those hazards we just talked about, intrinsic hazards, and that there are, other than physical or health hazards. So they just refer to the paragraph we just talked about. Yeah. Another big change for some international importers is that now on the label, it's required that you have a U.S. address and a U.S. telephone number for the chemical manufacturer on the label. They labeled F transportation because they've expanded it, and just added some clarification for labels for bulk shipments. They're actually allowing you to either, other than label the container, you can transfer the label with the shipping papers or the bill of lading in the case of a bulk shipment, or by agreement with the receiving entity, where they're set up to receive and print it. You can transmit the label electronically, as long as that the label information is immediately available to the workers at the receiving end of the shipment. So it's kind of a nice change. It reduces some paperwork. They've also made a change that where a container already has the DOT shipping label, for example, one of those across the top here, you don't have to also include the corresponding OSHA label. You can just rely on the DOT label rather than using the OSHA pictograms, for example, the 3 on the bottom of the page here. So that reduces a lot of redundancy in your labeling requirement. This is another nice improvement for some manufacturers. So if you manufacture a hazardous chemical and put it in containers and label it, but it's going to be stored for some period of time before it's shipped to a user. In those cases, it used to be every time you determined your label needed an update, you had a requirement to go and update the labels on all of those containers. Now, and so it could happen that you updated the label more than once while the material was just sitting in a warehouse waiting for a home. And now you can wait until you ship to update the labels. You don't have to update the labels in storage just because you've updated the labels on material going out of the business. Now, small container labeling, OSHA's recognized that containers of 100 milliliters or less capacity and it can be hard to label. In some cases, manufacturers said, well, if we have a pull-out label, a fold-back label, a tag on there, it's going to interfere with the use of our product. So in those cases, you could put it on a minimalistic label. It still needs a product identifier. What is the material? A pictogram warning, the signal word, and the chemical manufacturer's name, phone number, and a statement that the full label information is on the immediate outer package. And so then you put the full label on the immediate outer package that these smaller items are in. Okay, and then for materials, very small hazardous quantities, 3 mil capacity or less, so quite small quantities. The manufacturer feels that again they can't put a label on there because it would interfere with the normal use of that container. The only label that's required is a product identifier, and then the full label again has to go on the immediate outer package, and there has to be a statement on the outer package saying that the containers must remain in that package so that the the very small containers are always with the warning label that exists on the package. Safety data sheets, they've just cleaned up the information a little bit, and really recognize the way safety data sheets are handled these days compared to when the standard was brand new. Trade secrets. So when you have when the exact concentration is a trade secret of some ingredient, OSHA allows you to present a range of concentrations that it may be at without a lot of guidance. So these ranges could have been very broad in the past. So they've tightened up those ranges. We'll see that on the next page, exactly what those ranges are. But also they've changed from percentage to concentration, because percentage can be interpreted a couple of ways. It could be percent by weight, percent by volume. So OSHA is now using the term concentration to clear up that ambiguity. Okay, so if you're claiming the exact amount, the exact concentration of a chemical as a trade secret in a mixture that you're sending, you're now limited to these ranges. You can use a tighter range, but you can't use a broader range. And there's one exception if your trade secret ingredient is present in a range of concentrations, and that range ranges outside of one of these ranges. In that odd case, you can use two contiguous ranges together, but nothing broader. So real quickly, if, for example, you've got a chemical that's ranges from 0.4%, we'll look at A and B here. If you have a chemical that ranges from 0.4% to 1.1%, well, it doesn't fall specifically in either of these ranges. So you can now create a new range of 0.1% to 1.5%. And as I say, you can always use a tighter range, just not a broader range. And they changed again, percentages changed to concentrations we talked about. Here's where they clean up the language on physicians or licensed healthcare professionals, and get more percentage to compensation, just to concentration, just cleaning up the language here a little bit. Okay, so effective dates. On first read, July 19th is just around the corner. It sounds a little scary, but actually the standard incorporates some sufficient time ranges, I think, for all manufacturers to come into compliance. The language is here, but I put them into a table. So let's look at the table real quick. So to the extent if these changes require you to update your labels and your safety data sheets, you as a chemical manufacturer, importer, or distributor, you have to make those updates with 18 months. If you as an employer then receive updated labels and safety data sheets because of this update to the standard, you have another 6 months to update your program and your training as needed. And then OSHA recognized that mixtures can be a little harder to evaluate. So in the case of a chemical mixture, the manufacturers have another 18 months. They have 36 months after the publication of the standard. So that'd be May 20 to come up to date with those. And then again, you have another 6 months to update your program and train as needed. And in the interim period of time, you can comply with the old standard, or you comply with these changes. Actually, OSHA says from the date of publication, which is May 20th, you can rely on the old standard or transition to the new standard on your own schedule. Okay, OSHA added several new references that are incorporated by reference into the standard. So in the event you're relying on any of these and you're using an older version, just be aware that there are some new standards that have been incorporated by reference that may be important to you. Okay, the appendices, I didn't do the red line strikeout here. I've just summarized the changes to the appendices. So Appendix A is a health hazard criteria. Globally harmonized systems have been updated to reflect non-animal test methods. So there's a lot of new language to minimize the use of live animals in chemical hazard testing. Chemical B, as I mentioned, there's a new hazard class, desensitized explosives, and also they've reorganized the flammable gases, including to include the pyrophoric gases. So there's some revisions into those tables, and they're now recognizing non-flammable aerosols as potentially presenting a hazard, and so including them not in the aerosols class of hazards, so which used to concentrate on flammable aerosols. Appendix C are just some updates to improve communication of hazards on labels. The biggest thing they do is they remove a lot of redundancy. If two different hazards require the same pictogram, you only have to use the pictogram once. In fact, you can only use the pictogram once. If two different hazards have the same warning, you can just rely on a single warning to remove the redundancy. And also they ask you to align or to prioritize. So if the most likely hazard has to be listed first, and the others arranged by priority. Okay. They've made some changes to align with the DOT labeling regulations, and they've also worked with Health Canada to align labeling in the US and Canada. Appendix D, change there is a requirement for a US telephone number and US address. They made some clarifications, including trade secrets, also starting to address nanoparticles, which are used more and increasingly frequent exposures in manufacturing. Okay, OSHA has published some links. There's a HAZCOM page that has the standard and many other OSHA resources related to the hazard communication standard. On May 20th, when they published the new standard, they issued a news release that sort of summarizes the changes. If you're curious about the detailed development of the new standard, OSHA's rationale, comments they received during the comment period, their responses to comments, the whole economic analysis to look at the financial impacts of the standard, all that detail is available in the May 20 Federal Register here. OSHA also published an update to their questions and answers page for this update, just frequently asked questions and the OSHA response on this update specifically. They published a side-by-side comparison of the old standard with the new standard, which was the basis for the slide presentation. And if you looked at that early on, they've also now added the appendices. At first, the appendices weren't in there, but now a side-by-side red line version of the appendices is available in the side-by-side comparison. So for the most part, not a big effect for most of you manufacturers. You may see an increase in number of new safety data sheets as these manufacturers and distributors come up to date with these changes. But I don't see a big effect for most of our client base. If you ever want to have an OSHA consultation visit, the Safety and Health Survey, just go to our homepage. You'll see over here on the right-hand side, just request consultation, and it's an easy matter to request a consultation. There's a brief video explaining the consultation process there as well. Or you can always contact us, the Pennsylvania Consultation Office. The consultants take turns on phone duty. So during normal business hours, if you have a safety question, you can just phone our office at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and you'll be put in contact with one of the consultants to answer your question. So as we've just looked at, we have a website, we have a Facebook page, and we have a Twitter account in case anyone would like to follow either of those. And those addresses are here. Thank you for your attendance, your attention. I hope I clarified the new standard for you. And that concludes this conference. Thanks all.